My name is Mike Grigsby with MW Griggs Consulting. I am very, very excited to have this conversation. It's one that I have been having with individuals for a number of years, and I thought it was about time to kind of put a public spotlight on this. We are going to get kind of dive into a very interesting topic that I know a lot of city leaders are facing, and even those in private sector industry. I know you're facing these challenges as well, and certainly we're going to hear from our guests. Um, Thank you again for taking time out of your day to be here as part of this event. And one of the things that we're going to do on the backside of this is you can put your questions and answers, a little bit of housekeeping right now. You can put your questions into the Q&A portion of the webinar. We may end up having time at the end to get to maybe one or two of those questions. If we can't get to all of the questions, when I publish the link for the recording, I will go back through the Q&A and we'll grab all of the questions and we will try to answer as many of those as we can. We may not have the answers, but we'll try to address them as best we're able to. So with that, I want to be mindful of everyone's time, and we're going to jump right into this. So uh, MW Griggs Consulting has been around for about 3 years now, but it's my personal background is a as a former public sector CIO. I served as a CIO in law enforcement, in public transportation, and at the municipal level. And then also have a deep background working with global technology enterprises, helping to develop smart city strategies, and then helping cities, primarily cities, helping them implement those solutions. This is a background that I've been in for the last 12 years. I've been in public sector since 2005. So this is definitely in my wheelhouse, and I love having these conversations. I love watching and working with communities across the country to see the kinds of solutions they're looking at. But more importantly, I love diving into the problems, tackling these problems and really unpacking them and seeing how cities and city leaders are orienting themselves around this. That's the stuff I could do all day long. So I love this, and I am excited for my two guests today because we're going to be talking about a topic that I know is near dear to their hearts as well as my own. This morning we have Bob Bennett. Bob and I have known each other for quite a while, but Bob has been active in local government since his retirement from the military 25 years ago. He was in the U.S. Army with a last command over Army Command in Africa. So a lot of background on that side. From 2016 to 2019, he served as the Chief Innovation Officer for the city of Kansas City, Missouri. Some of the key projects during that time included completing technology initiatives with the Kansas City streetcar corridor and initiating a smart city infrastructure public-private partnership. We may get to talk about that a little bit later. Following his stint with the city of Kansas City, Bob now chairs the Cities Today Institute, which is a multinational think tank that allows city leaders to focus in on technology as one of their many policy and operation management tools to solve those city challenges. Bob is also an elected official serving as an alderman in the city of Parkville, Missouri, which is a suburb of Kansas City, and he chairs he's the vice chair for the finance committee there. Also, one of my other guest is Jeremy Stevens. Jeremy is president of Fluent Consultants, a business-first technology firm supporting growing organizations nationwide with strategic advisory and expert software engineering. With over 20 years of deep software experience, he's led complex initiatives across industries. And Jeremy has helped guide and grow Fluent through a business partner approach that resonates with leaders who need more on that technology. More than technology, they need the right solution to scale effectively. Gentlemen, I am grateful for you to be here. Thank you. Um, this is a really interesting topic. The premise of this webinar is really to talk about technical debt and legacy systems. Now, we're going to focus some of our conversation in the public sector, primarily because that's the work that I am focused in on. But I think, Jeremy, you're going to be able to bring in not just insights from the private sector, but I think we're going to be able to see how private sector and public sector we're tackling and we're wrestling with the exact same challenges, and I think you'll be able to speak to that. and how that, the technical debt and the legacy systems, how they impact, or maybe even we could say impede, a lot of communities' efforts to try to do what's called digital transformation. Now, we're going to unpack some of these topics, I think, because I want to get everybody on the same page. A lot of times we ask these kind of questions for definitions, and we might get multiple answers. So I want to level the playing field and kind of give everybody a level playing field to kind of a frame of reference to look at these. I think the other thing too, when we talk about this, it can easily sound like this is going to be a technical conversation. We're going to talk about bits and bytes and ones and zeros and things along that line. We're going to elevate the conversation. We're going to talk about mindset in particular. We're going to talk about preparation, and we're going to move away from the jargon of the technology itself and really start to dig into like approaches and orientation and how do you prepare things, how do organizations prepare to address and tackle these issues. So one of the first things before I toss the questions out is I want to begin with a definition of technical debt and legacy system. They sound synonymous, but there's really a difference. And if we need to unpack these a little bit more, we can. But technical debt really kind of centers around the software development. When you start to, organizations start to look at the code that goes into software, either quick fixes or bolt-on code and things along those lines, it begins to kind of create a debt that gets passed on into the future, and it makes it really, really challenging to either pivot towards new or emerging opportunities or technologies, or it can just create challenges with service delivery. By a similar token, legacy systems talks about the systems themselves and the high cost of either maintaining them or the high challenges related to moving from a legacy system into more modern and more emerging technologies. For today's discussion, we're going to lump both of those under the term technical debt. I think it'll make it easier, but we're talking either software or we're talking systems. And so I just, again, want to make sure that everybody's on the same playing field when we talk about that. Last thing I'll say before I jump into the questions is I talked about mindset. And one of the challenges, and I guess my one of my favorite quotes comes from George Bernard Shaw, who says that progress is impossible without change. And if you can't change your mind, you can't change anything. And we really do need to begin to understand our thinking. And maybe even I could say we need to think about the way that we're thinking these things, because it really does. These are divergent opportunities as technology begins to accelerate. It's divergent opportunities in front of us, and it really requires divergent thinking. Unhook from the way we've always done it, and really begin to embrace kind of what the new opportunities are. That also puts us into it moves us from from an either or mindset to a both and mindset. It used to be either we quickly move through these, kind of these challenges. Either we spend heavily on maintaining old systems or we risk failure. Either we launch quickly with fragmented code or we delay it for a fully baked product. I think we really do have to begin to embrace this both and mindset, not the either or. And we're going to dive into that. So that's my preamble. And I hope it kind of sets the playing field for everybody and kind of where we're going to go with this. Bob, I'm going to toss the first question out to you. One of the things that I know that you are doing now with cities today, you're helping them shift their mindset. Not just about technology, but kind of what they do to begin to get ready to change their technology. Just share very quickly what that looks like and kind of how your conversations are to help city leaders in particular begin to shift their mindset around technology.
Well, I guess first of all, it's great to be with you guys again. One of the great secrets of these wonderful events, quite frankly, is the prep call opportunities we have, and being able to expand a little bit on what we talked about last week actually kind of shaped a little bit of what we're doing, even in Parkville this morning when we were at a public meeting for a project we're working on there, and I think it speaks exactly to what you're talking about with respect to shifting a mindset. We spent all of this morning talking through how we are looking at a physical road project and how that's going to be impacted. And one of the residents in the area who was very concerned about understanding the rationale behind which we were looking at this change. It was like, have you stood on my street corner and counted the cars? Well, no, nobody did, because once upon a time I used to have an intern do that. And as per your preamble, an intern was a very expensive asset because that was time that we took away from an incredibly talented human being and made them sit there and make tick marks on a piece of paper for the better part of 3 or 4 days in order to truly get sort of the vibe of that intersection. Instead, now I have a sensor that does that. And we got comprehensive data over literally a full week's worth of data. 160 some odd hours of data that we were looking at to solve the problem, which in this case is twofold. Number one, safety, and number two, how we are managing traffic flow most efficiently. Getting our residents to appreciate the fact that we have problems in those two spaces required us to actually catalog things like near misses. So many times you'll see on public data sets, this is how many people got hit in an intersection and were injured. Instead, they need to probably start looking more, and we've had multiple conversations about this at CTI, about, no, we need to know more about the near misses. Because quite frankly, in many cases, if we address those issues, we will also be addressing those things that people say are the biggest issue. The biggest issue is the proximity of cars to people. It's not just the incidents, it's the potential and the incidents itself. So reframing the problem statement is the first step, I think, probably for a lot of these cities, to clearly define what their objective is. In this case, it was safety. We took it away from getting rid of accidents to this is a safety issue, and we are evaluating this with two variables, not one. That was the first mindset change. The second mindset change was getting people comfortable with the idea that things are going to be different tomorrow. I think in a lot of cases, you're going to find cities are actually about 100 times more open to that than a lot of the residents who are against change in a lot of cases. There will be folks in the community who say they're for change, but on further review, you're going to discover that the change that they want is for my business, I want this parking. For my business, I want this particular amenity. For my personal enjoyment of birds, I want to have no traffic on my street. They're not actually open to change. What they're open to is something that benefits themselves. So getting that mindset change to be adopted by the whole community is the other real challenge there. And quite frankly, it takes a lot of public meetings, it takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of actually talking about what those problems are, to the point where you pull your hair out.
Well, you and I both have been in enough of those public meetings to understand kind of the challenges of thinking new and thinking ahead. And we're gonna come back to that. I love that you said this, and I think that's the takeaway out of what you just said. Reframe the problem statement, right? Because if we think the problem is one thing, right, but it's something different where we could end up solving for something that's not going to move the needle the way we want to. Jeremy, that really kind of brings me to the world that you're in as you are working with organizations who are actively making digital transformation efforts for either cost, for benefits, for competitiveness, and things along those lines. Reframing the problem statement is part of it, but I think talk about a little bit how you are helping your customers and the organization you work with reframe a little bit how you're helping them to think holistically. And this kind of goes to what Bob is talking about, right? We can get fixated on trying to solve one thing when that one thing is actually kind of attached to a whole bunch of different things, right? We could be looking at system X, not realizing or not comprehending its impact on system Y and system Z. Talk a little bit about that as you are helping organizations at the beginning of their projects think through the kind of a holistic view of their initiatives.
Well, I think you've hit on one of our favorite words for sure, which is holistic. If we could vote for the dictionary.com word of the year multiple times, this would be it. We talk to a lot of companies that when they start looking at their systems and their technologies, they'll look at it as from a single lens or a single perspective. And they'll look at it from the perspective of, well, we need to find a way to handle our sales pipeline. So let's go look at a CRM. But then don't consider how once we have a CRM and we're going to start entering orders, which is, this is a very common thing in the private sector, is, well, how do we move them to our operational system? And that kind of gets moved down the road. And eventually, the short answer is it doesn't get solved well, or it gets solved by putting people into it, which makes the system even more expensive than we thought, and less efficient than we thought it was going to be. And so what we advocate for is a holistic look at any organization to understand how each department works with each other. In a lot of cases, especially in the private sector, one department may feed another, or they need to use a central system, or there's different things in play, and understanding how each of them work with each other and what their expectations are in serving their customers is critical. To your point, it does create long-term, it also creates the cost of rework. So if you do bring in system 1 at some point, and then several systems down the road, you discover that system 5 won't talk to system 1. Rarely ever do you get to a situation where it's impossible to fix it. However, it does take time and money. And so we advocate focus on that planning and design up front, so that that even if you don't implement everything simultaneously, which most organizations don't, and we would typically recommend you don't, you do want to make sure that you have a plan in place so that as they come in, they snap together and work as you hoped from the beginning.
Yeah. I have always talked about it in terms of thrashing, quote unquote thrashing, right? Every project that you undertake has some level of thrashing, and the cost and energy that's required to do that thrashing on the back end towards the end of your project, is way more costly, way more time consuming than taking that upfront time to do the design and planning, like you're talking about, to think holistically around it and do the thrashing on the front end where it's not as costly and not as time consuming. I think a favorite quote of mine is, if you have an hour to chop down a tree, spend the first 45 minutes sharpening your axe, right? And I think that's kind of the same attitude to look at these technology initiatives, right? I think it would be I think it would be challenging for cities to, or any organization really, to try to do in one fell swoop to change their, to transform all at once. First of all, our systems don't work that way. Secondly, I think by the time you get done, you need to go back and transform everything again. I like the idea that you're sharing, Jeremy, is think holistically, but take it incrementally too, right? Sequencing is such a part of all of this. The other thing, and Bob, I'm getting ready to talk about a project you and I worked on. The other thing is thinking through the long-term ownership, total cost of ownership, the long-term planning of this, right? It used to be that technology, and I remember, I've been in the technology, sector for 35 years. It used to be that it was kind of a one and done. You would pay for it once, you would implement it, and then it would get to an end of life, and then you'd go buy the upgrade and things along those lines. It doesn't work that way anymore. And this idea, especially with everything as a service now, or at least trending towards as a service, there's this mindset that has to be adopted that says we're in this for a long period of time, not just attached to one particular vendor, but we're in this undertaking, this total cost of ownership. Bob, one of the key projects you and I worked on was the technology overlay for the Kansas City streetcar corridor. The initial launch of that, 1.2 miles, was an existing project that we were able to overlay technology on top of for the longest time. In fact, we were able to boast kind of the smartest 53 blocks in North America, right? Talk a little bit, right? This idea of long-term planning, holistic planning really speaks to the notion of stewardship, right? We're not just a one and done and buy it and then end of life. Talk about how you were able to communicate to city leaders this idea of like ownership of this, and it's going to be iterative over a long, protracted period of time, right? We just a few months ago, extended that streetcar line, and there's still more technology that's being overlaid on top of that. So talk a little bit about how you were able to convey that message to the key stakeholders and city leaders around this idea of long-term stewardship.
And I think the key thing to the success of that streetcar project, and quite frankly, I think the success of any project where cities are going to be using technology moving forward, is number one, education on the city side of the house. We have to accept the fact that any technology that we purchase is going to be obsolete within 3 to 7 years. And that is simply the rate at which a lot of these technologies tend to expire. And a sufficiently robust upgrade is available. You have to make that change in order to stay current. I think some of the drama that we saw immediately after COVID, as the federal government, and probably the most egregious example, had to figure out ways to continue payments because so much of that was in COBOL or Fortran. And the people who spoke those languages and could operate those systems were simply not available anymore because they had retired. And as everyone switched to working from home and access to those systems is no longer possible, they struggled mightily. What we did at Streetcar was different than that, in that the service of connectivity was provided by a partner organization, and that was Sprint at the time. Obviously now T-Mobile.
Yeah.
The service of the data regarding the parked cars, where those cars were, how many spaces were available, and the way we made that data available to the public was two other partners. One of them was the sensor partner, which is now Verizon. The other one was who was it? I think it was actually the Streetcar Authority itself. The city was yet a third user of that data. So building these partnerships where all of us invest into those systems allowed us to distribute the risk and also the cost when we had to do the upgrades. But it also kept all of us at our A game because we all wanted to be successful. And our piece of that meant that on the city side, we had to update our policies. We had to update how we deployed police forces, which is how you and I got into that conversation about when we would ticket people for getting into the right of way of the streetcar, when we would tow people, and what types of notifications had to be made to the owners of those vehicles before we did that. Our technology had a greater capacity to identify the car, but because individuals have rights, we had to make sure that we almost dialed it back a couple of notches so that we could be compliant with our own regulations and our own rules that we apply to ourselves, because our residents expect that. The second thing I think with a lot of these updates that we have to think about when we're updating technology in the city side is understanding and pacing it in such a way. Only 88% of the people in the world have cell phones, which from a private sector perspective is sufficient to deploy exclusively on cell phones and still see a little black number at the bottom of your spreadsheet at the end of the year instead of a red one. And let's face it, that's good news. However, if you are providing something like food or public safety or water that's clean enough to drink, or electricity that stays on so that we can have these conversations over these phones, that has to be available to everyone all the time, even the 12% that don't have the cell phone in their hands. Right. So that off-ramp where those services are available to everyone in the community has to still exist on the city side. So as per Jeremy was saying there, you have to look at this thing holistically. The effect you're trying to achieve is better services. Okay, so let's digitize this. Let's put this all onto a cloud platform we can all access. But at the same time, we have to make sure that the backstop is there so everyone in the community gets the benefit of these improved systems.
Well, I wish we had more time to unpack that, because there's so much tied into that. Bob, I'm going to key in on one of the things that you said there, and you talked about policy. One of the challenges when we look at what we'll call digital transformation, right? First, we try to digitize government. Now we're making government digital, or the service delivery. One of the challenges is getting out of our own way, right? We've created this infrastructure around procedures and protocol. We've created this infrastructure that says this is the way things get done. And one of the challenges is that we forget that we didn't we didn't get here all in one kind of one trip, one journey, right? It was an iterative approach over a very, very long period of time. The policies have been updated over time, right? What's challenging right now is at the rate that technology is changing and the rate that it's being made available and the rate that it's being adopted and consumed by virtually every user within a community, it is really challenging some of those existing policies, protocols, procedures, et cetera. I want to talk and kind of take that and use that as a segue to talk about decoupling the architecture of technology and really focus in on this idea of policy and kind of this idea of processes. And, Jeremy, when we think about this, um, we've talked about this in ways of like there's going to be a day one, a proverbial flip of the switch in the new system, in the new transformed thing. But there is a long there's a long runway before we get that. And talk a little bit about kind of the way that you have seen your customers and certainly the way you've guided them, but how are you helping them to think in terms of making, looking at and kind of unpacking their processes, right? And then overlaying technology on top of their processes. And really, the reason I bring this up is because too often the temptation is to digitize our existing process without scrutinizing it, realizing that it was only done because we didn't have the modern conveniences or the modern opportunities of capabilities of what technology is doing. So think through that a little bit and help us understand, get into your mindset about how you're guiding your customers in preparing and not preparing, but to look at their processes, not just overlay technology on top of that.
Yeah, so we go back to our favorite word of the day, which is holistic. And I think that applies to both technology and process. And so understanding, both from what are the systems that are in place in any organization is one question of where we start from. But the other is processes, because systems, is not the end all be all of any organization. It's an accelerator, it's an assistant, it's a support, but ultimately it's the people that drive an organization forward, and the processes they use are critical. And so one of the things that we look at is understanding what each person is trying to accomplish or what each department is trying to accomplish. And we know they use current processes today, but one of the questions we ask is, if your systems were gone tomorrow, say everything crashed, you had to do this from a hand, what would you do? What do you need to do to make your customers still happy, still successful, still positive? And we look at it from that perspective because we want to decouple, to your point, Mike. We don't want to talk about, I go to this screen and I click here, I go to that screen and click here. That's not as important as why you're doing it and who you're doing it for. And so we want to walk through each department and really understand what are the processes that they need to deliver on to their customers, regardless of system. Because when we look at systems, we want to find the ones that mesh to the way they want to work. We have been to a number of places that have new systems that are hated because while they're sparkly and new, they don't work the way anyone there wants to work. And it really creates more chaos than it solves. And so our approach, like I said, is always to start with the process, start with the people, and then from there move back into find the right system that works for them, and the ones that work together across the
Yeah.
organization.
Yeah, I know, I know. There's oftentimes like just the rhetoric out there is that public sector moves much slower than private sector. That it's more bureaucratic than the private sector. I know you disagree with that. I know you've seen the bureaucracy on the private sector side.
For
Um,
sure.
one of the things that I would really be interested to hear from you is right. What you're talking about is this idea of processes. How do you help your customers? How do you help them focus on the end, not the process to get to the end? Because that's got to be part of the conversation within transformation, right? You're not just making something improved on what you were doing before, but you're looking at completely different ways of accomplishing the task. How do you help them kind of look at the end or focus on the end of what needs to be accomplished as opposed to how they're currently getting to the end?
So we do a number of things. A is we meet with each of the departments within any organization to really dig into, how they do things today, as well as talking to the leadership to understand how they wish things would be done a few years from now. And really it's kind of the merger of those two that bring us to the end result, which is, well, we call it the roadmap. If we were to borrow from construction, we call it a blueprint. We tell the story a lot of times that ultimately we need the blueprint because no one builds a house by buying a dirt lot and having lumber delivered and then start pounding nails into the 2x4s. We all know how that's going to go. But at the same time, it has certainly been done on the technology side where we just start dropping in systems and, hope for the best. And that is about as successful as building a house the same way. And they're large, complex things. They can be solved. Clearly, there's beautiful houses all around Kansas City, so this can be done, but you have to do it a certain way. And so we advocate for that process, and that's really how we go about doing it. Because once you have the blueprint, everyone can see and understand, where they play or where they fit into it, how they're going to work within it. And of course, it's much easier to make changes on a drawing than having to move the kitchen from the left to the right side of the house once the studs are up.
That's so important, right? And I know this language, I know this analogy, but I think the other thing too that really helps organizations, be it private, be it public sector. I think the thing that helps by developing a blueprint is it really drives home the need for sequencing, right? The blueprint, you can't put a penthouse on the ground floor, right? You have to dig the foundation. There has to be a third floor, fifth floor, sixth floor, eventually, right? y- I think this idea of the blueprint really also helps control and kind of manage expectations, right? There is going to be a house at some point. Right now, it's just a poured concrete foundation, or it's just the footers, or it's just right. The idea that it helps manage expectations is the purpose of the blueprint. Bob, this idea of the blueprint and eventually kind of getting down the road on this also makes me think about digital adoption, right? At some point there is going to be a house, proverbial house. At some point there's going to be the new technology system, right? But one of the challenges is getting people to adopt that, both on the practitioner side as well as on the constituent side, the resident who's going to be using or benefiting from the service delivery. I know that you around the country, certainly even around the globe, you are holding conversations and holding discourse with city leaders, city managers, mayors, even your, not even, but in particular, your chief information officers. Gosh, I couldn't say that. Chief information officers. They are wrestling with this idea of digital adoption of their own teams, but also in introducing this to the citizens. How are you guiding or helping them guide and kind of unpack those challenges that they're doing? Because I know it's happening in so many different cities. How are you helping guide those conversations?
Well, it goes back to what Jeremy was talking a little bit about, sort of setting those expectations and establishing the vision. Um, Certainly, while the work of designing the blueprint itself, figuring out the PERT diagram as to how to build that home with that blueprint is absolutely the realm of the professional staff in any city. And they're amazing. And quite frankly, many of them are digital natives, and many of them are quite comfortable with using these tools, be they AI enhanced planning software, be they means of communication and public engagement like YouTube, like um, any of the social media networks, in terms of meetings like this and webinars where people can engage digitally, so they don't have to make the trip to City Hall on a random Tuesday night. So I think, certainly the city staff side of the house is capable of doing all this work. It is making sure that is acceptable in a lot of cases to the elected bodies. And in that regard, one of the things that we tried to do, and I think you'll remember this from our shared time in Kansas City, when we attempted to come up with the comprehensive technology deployment plan. And the only way that we could get it to work from City Manager Troy Schulte's perspective and Mayor James's perspective was to establish its ultimate vision, that picture of what the blueprint looks like when complete, that was 10 years beyond either of their term limits and their time to be in power. And essentially, they traded in their future to say, this is what has to be achieved. And the route to get there starts with us, but it takes us 10 years to get there. And so the way we tried to insulate that was by making it a true public-private partnership governed by contracts, so that there were multiple stakeholders involved, many of whom were not elected officials. The folks who were then driving the assessments along that 10-year journey were all your professional staffers. And it also provided an on-ramp for the ideas from the community to talk about if we need to move the kitchen from the left side to the right side on the next floor up, but we can't do it on this floor because that floor is already established. And we've already put in all of the walls for that. So for the next floor up, we'll look at that. And now I need to run an extra pipe and an extra piece of conduit to account for that on the next floor, because we've learned that where the sun sets, it causes the sun to go into the eyes of the cook, and we have a drama there. So I think it takes having that vision and making sure that is a shared vision that we can all work toward, and then let folks do their jobs. Let the professionals show their professional expertise and awesomeness.
No, that's it's so poignant because we see so many success stories across the country, cities that are kind of, I always like to say, kind of poking the box. They're exploring and trying things out. We saw this in so many different cities, and there's a new wave even now that of cities that are really trying to kind of take advantage and really leverage what these emerging technology solutions are doing. Jeremy, I want to play off of something that Bob just talked about, and this idea. We're back to the blueprint and kind of managing expectations, but also kind of setting this notion that it's going to take some time, right? You don't just start here and end on the next day, right? There's this iterative approach to it. Talk about it. Talk about this from an advantageous standpoint, right? Why the waiting for a slow, kind of fully baked solution for digital transformation just doesn't work today. The way technology is shaping up, the way that it's coming out as fast as, talk about why it's not advantageous to wait for that kind of slow, full baked solution anymore.
Well, I think it's to your point, Mike. If you wait too long, it's not that interesting anymore. And so you kind of have to know at what point is good enough. And you could wait for perfection, but you would never get there. And in the meantime, you're failing to deliver, what you could be delivering to your stakeholders, taxpayers or whoever they may be. And so really, as you look at, a lot of this comes down to risk. I think, when you look at a technology plan, or blueprint, as we're talking about here, you could potentially try to review every single way that a system or a process may create challenges. Then the reality is, if I don't think any system's ever gone in and ever created zero challenges, but they are able to be handled. And really what you're looking for is identifying the risks that are showstoppers, the ones where you should, kind of stay sober and say, I need to work through this. We need to find an answer, versus others that are, minor enough to say, okay, this may be an issue down the road, but we have the right people in place to solve it. And we have the right plan in place to address it. So from that perspective, I think it helps you move forward, safely. Again, it's not perfection. But at the same time, it's a managed and a measured risk.
Well, so we hear about this again. The rhetoric is that private sector can move forward with that a little bit easier, I guess, with less friction, because they're delivering a paid for service at a consumer level, typically, right? Bob, we get hung up in this idea, or I guess maybe again back to kind of this idea of friction. We get hung up in the public sector side with this idea that exploration and trial and error just isn't acceptable. Talk a little bit, one, about how you're having those conversations or helping city leaders have those conversations, but two, talk about the risks of not trialing error and not exploring and creating kind of that, that playground to go do that.
Well, I guess I'd push back a little bit on the idea that cities aren't open to that. I dare say, cities in many ways are the most open to iteration and looking at changing things, simply because the cost to do operations is only going up. The amount of funding available within cities is actually decreasing in real value, both with the lack of support from federal and state and private sector charitable philanthropy type organizations who've been funding some interesting things, and it costs more to lay asphalt on the street now than it did last year because the asphalt's more expensive. So finding a way to do things more efficiently, more cost effectively, cities are very open to that. Where you find, I think, the friction or the reticence necessarily to do some of these changes in a lot of cases are the residents who expect a city to behave in a certain way and don't want them to. Because if you change my street, well, then the way that I go to work every day is going to have to change. I'm going to have to change my behavior. Americans are wonderful human beings, but let me tell you, they're not nearly as open to change as they like to promote on their little Facebook page. They just aren't. So I think the governments themselves are quite open to the idea. And I think it goes back to where we were on our last sort of discussion topic. You got to share the vision. It has to be a shared vision. There has to be a holistic approach where the effect that is achieved is a safer community. When you sell the safer community as a political objective during a campaign for an office, you actually have to, if I think you're a discerning person, ask the specifics. How are you going to evaluate what's safe? Is it traffic safety? Is it more police presence on the streets so that people feel safer in terms of a crime issue? Is it providing digital tools to police officers so they can do their reporting from inside of a vehicle, and therefore they can be writing whatever reports they have to write while sitting in a squad car at your most dangerous intersection, causing people's behavior then to slow down? Even though what that officer is doing, she or he could just as easily be in an office. But because we have an improved network, they're able to do that work at an intersection now.
Right.
So I think the willingness in terms of the day-to-day operations of the cities is absolutely there. It's just we have to articulate why we are making that change. And again, that requires a certain amount of political capital be expended by a lot of my sisters and brothers on the elected officer side that, a lot of us are going to lose our jobs because of that. You got to accept that fact and move on with it and say it's somebody else's turn. And that's okay. In fact, it's more than okay. It allows for an additional voice to come into the room. And then that iterative voice will hopefully make us better in the long term. We got to commit to the long-term vision. The short-term vision ain't going to cut it on the local government side.
Yeah, I agree. The premise of this webinar is we're talking about technical debt and we're talking about legacy systems. And already we've talked about the mindset side of this. We've talked about the preparatory aspects of this. Let's dig into a little bit more now on how we quote unquote pay off that debt, right? So when we start to think about the way systems are operating right now, I would venture to say, and this is an arbitrary number, but I would have to say probably better than 95% of all municipal governments, certainly in the United States, are in a mindset of progress. And I don't have data to say which 5% are not in that mindset, but I'm just saying, that after COVID, or if COVID did anything for us as a nation, it really reminded us that everything touches and depends on everything else, and it really pushed us into this this kind of era of advanced, or more, I should say, more modern technology services and digital government. One of the things that we look at now is a mindset shift. And Jeremy, I'm going to ask you on this one in particular, because we need the mindset shift around just the life cycle of technology, the adoption rate of technology, and things along those lines. Traditionally, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, but traditionally, technology was defined by a completion date. It was done. It went live. It was a set it and forget it, right? That era seems to have passed.
Mhm.
I remember in 2009, when Adobe, maybe it was 2008, but Adobe changed their pricing model, and they went from what we called, perpetual software license to a subscription service. And I remember I was in the technology world at that time, and I thought the world has changed. My OpEx just went like this, and my CapEx just went like this. As we begin to think about this, and as those funding kind of containers shift for us, and looks like it's going to do more of that, CapEx is going to get stretched even more. Talk about this mindset of shifting from projects with an end and completion date
Mhm.
to product ownership, right? Talk a little bit about that, and how you're guiding your customers, and certainly people through that.
Yeah, so I think there's a number of ways that we do that. One of them is operational impact or efficiency. So when a project approach is taken, it implies that there's this whatever system you're implementing gets updated once every few years. So we call it the Big Bang effect. So we know that every 5-ish years we're going to have a new sparkly system and things will be right in the world, and then begins the decay and the decline. And for the next 5 years, things get progressively worse as the rest of the world goes past us, and we wish we had the things that the organization down the street did. But the reality is, we think and we hope that we're going to get these things in year 5, but then it turns out in year 5 we had a bad year, so now it's year 6, so we're a year behind that, and we do a big bang and then repeat the process. And we all wish it would change. And so I think, to your point, Adobe was one of the first to move to the new model to say, pretty much if you own something, there's going to be ongoing maintenance. There's going to be ongoing enhancement to whatever it is, whether it's your car, your house, or your systems. And the reality is, it is helpful to make sure that it's maintained and updated and enhanced because you use it every day. And so it's not, again, we believe that the systems don't define the organization, the people do, but the systems support the people. And so making sure that the systems have a pathway forward to continue to grow and enhance and evolve and support them is ideal. And really, when you look at it from that perspective, from a financial lens, if you take the Big Bang approach, you're doing a CapEx spend every 5 years. If you take the product approach, you may be more into an OpEx model, but over the course of 5 to 7 years, you're probably not spending that many different dollars. But the outcome is substantially better because you're helping your people do their jobs better all along the way for not a tremendous amount of dollars difference. So we find that a lot of leaders are moving to this model. They want to find ways to make sure their people have the right tools, and they're continually, as you said before, sharpening the axe as they go.
Yeah. Bob, I see you nodding your head. You have comments on that, I could tell.
So in my mind, the poster child on the public side for that same mindset is Mike Peggy's, formerly the CIO in the city of Aurora, Illinois. He absolutely believes that, and I totally agree with him, that when you empower your professional staff to solve a problem in the most efficient manner possible, they're going to gravitate toward these tools which are most efficient in the marketplace. And because, especially in a place like Aurora, a suburb like Parkville, as compared to our neighbors down on the other side of the Missouri River in Kansas City, we're a little bit more nimble in terms of using these tools because our employees are younger. They're digital natives. They literally just came out of school in a lot of cases with their MPAs, and their professors at the KUs and the Park universities of the world were showing them how to use AI enhanced tools to do a better job of planning. So we just used them. And that requires a site license, or it requires, a subscription to a piece of planning software that they then use. Well, that means I don't have to hire out a contract, or I don't have to use a bunch of old equipment that maybe someone who's a little bit more seasoned might use. to create that same model for the same exact project. And so in terms of how we deal with that as an elected body, the cost to operate my planning department, maybe the operations cost is higher. My OpEx is a little higher because I've got all these tools. But I'm not investing in another set of slide rules. I'm not investing in another bunch of physical models, which will not get used. I'm not investing in having my intern stand on the corner making tick marks, when instead they could just be getting a download from a sensor provider who told them what happened over the course of an entire week. And a CapEx expenditure requires 1,000 public meetings. An OpEx is a once a year investment in time in a deliberate, and to use your word, Jeremy, holistic budgeting exercise wherein we figure out what the community wants to do. And again, it leverages what our greatest asset, which are those professionals on our city staffs who know what they're doing. And that technology then just becomes a tool, just as you're saying, it's people over processes, people over software.
Yeah. I'm going to come back to both of you and get a closing thought. I'm looking at the time here, and I knew we were not going to be able to unpack everything that we wanted to. There's so many more facets. There's the talent side to this. There's the data side to this. There's the the structure that's currently in place. Like we haven't gotten to a lot of the components that leaders need to be thinking about, not just acting, not just jumping in, like you said, Jeremy, just start pounding, a 2x4 in the ground and start putting nails into it. Like there's a planning side to this that leaders really need to orient around and leverage that, right? That is, I think more than anything else, that may be the most crucial aspect of quote unquote digital transformation, is the non-digital part of that, right? Is the conversation, the planning, the thinking, the preparation that goes into it. As we look at this, right, there's not a community out there, be it the US, be it around the world. There's not a community that technology is not impacting, and the rate and speed, the rate and kind of volume at which technology is changing, being introduced, being changed and upgraded is happening at such a dizzying pace that if we don't understand and kind of set firm our orientation to it, to know what we're trying to accomplish, not how we're going to do it, but to know what we're going to accomplish, we're going to get swayed and tossed to and fro with every new technology thing that comes out. I don't remember which one of you said it, but technology is an augmentation of what we're delivering through our services and through our human interaction, right? It should help us to do things more effectively, efficiently, economically, but also there's a fourth E, that it should be helping us create better experiences for the people that are on the receiving end of that. I used to always tell my technology teams, on the receiving end of every single thing we do as a living, breathing human being. And if we miss that fact, we're going to kind of create issues or create challenges that are probably unnecessary. So just in closing thoughts, Jeremy, what is your, if you could leave the audience with one thought around digital transformation and or technical debt legacy systems, what would you want them to know?
From our perspective, we talked to a lot of our clients, about, to your point, experience, which is your end users, the people that you serve. They are not just interacting with you; they're interacting with a lot of different places. So think large box retailers, and some of those retailers have trucks that show up and deliver whatever you want, within a few hours. You basically, everything's moving to the palm of your hand, so that when you want to know something, you can have that information at the ready. You can make simple decisions, and you don't have to call somebody somewhere and wait in line to do something that at this point would be perceived as something simple. On the other hand, there are complex issues. If somebody has a problem with their invoice or their billing, and they want to understand why they were charged a certain amount of money, they probably do want to call. And so really what we focus on a lot of our conversation is automating the things that people want automated. And then in tandem, that helps free up the people you do have on your staff to focus on those bigger picture issues where your customers and your end users do want to engage at a human level. And so we really, again, see systems and technology as the enabler to make those kind of things happen. So we want to automate the things that people expect to be automated, but that also frees up time to focus on people's needs.
Now, fantastic. Bob, a closing thought. I know that you are working with city leaders. And anything that you want to pass on specifically to that, or just speak to digital transformation in general terms?
I guess I'm sort of thinking of a day in January of 2022 when a philosopher who lives here in Kansas City actually was talking to a local mayor, sort of about kind of how things operate. And what Travis Kelsey said that day was, know your role and do your job, you jabroni. Speaking, of course, the mayor of Cincinnati at the time after we just kicked their ass in the AFC Championship game. And so if you're a leader, set that vision beyond what your current term is. Be clear in what that vision is and how you assess that vision can be evaluated. Define public safety in a way that the professionals who work in that city can enforce it. Define what quality of life is in a way that can be actually implemented by your professional staff. If you are on the city manager or the professional staff side of the house, be realistic. Talk about what your staff can do. Talk about what they can't do, and identify those gaps where technology might actually enable them to accomplish that vision. And then if you're a resident, understand where you play in this. There are times when the community really wants you to talk about what you want. There are other times when it's interesting that you don't like the decision that was made last year, but that decision was made, so it's also irrelevant. So shut up. And again, it's just know your role, do your job, and don't be a jabroni.
I don't know that that's going to be the key takeaway, Bob, but yeah, very, very well said. To the audience, thank you again for spending the time with us. This is a timely topic. I know I spend my time every day, every week, looking at what's happening in the technology sector, and knowing what's happening and what's on the horizon over the next 5 to 7 years is coming at a blistering pace, and it is going to challenge everything that we have built within our certainly our public sector organizations, the infrastructure, the processes, the protocols. It's going to challenge that, and we need to make sure that we are ready, and we're thinking correctly, and we're orienting ourselves correctly around this. We're not going to get it always right. We're not going to be 100% right. We're not going to get everything right, but we do need to be prepared. And I like to always say, conversations don't cost budget. Have the conversations, talk to people. Cities Today is a fantastic organization that is helping leaders, city leaders, orient around and have these kinds of discussions. Reach out to Bob if you are a city leader and want to start having those kinds of conversations. Fluent Consultants is a phenomenal organization that is helping public and private organizations make these moves through digital transformation. One of the best things that I know that they do, and what really got me connected with them, is the assessments that they're doing. Before you start to do anything, you got to understand where you are, what you're dealing with, what you're working with. Reach out to Fluent, schedule a time to have an assessment before you begin trying to do anything, and let them help you build your roadmap. So again, a topic that I wish we had probably 3 weeks to spend more time unpacking. Unfortunately, we're at time. I will provide a recording on this, send it out to everybody that registered. Jeremy, Bob, thank you again for your insights. Thank you again for this conversation. And maybe we'll jump into this at another time, sometime in the near future.